I want you to get together.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. I wanted to have you on before I have an expert on the Byzantine Empire that's coming on my live stream next week. And
Cool.
for everybody out here, Paul Stobbs, the famous The Nephilim Look Like Clowns author, is here to talk to us more about the Little Season than anything. We had talked about your previous book or your now famous book last time you were on the podcast, but I have been feeling so compelled to talk to you after your last John Kerwin interview.
Yes.
I haven't heard somebody speak so succinctly and so clearly on the millennial reign of Christ. Like it was so the way you two had your banter and the way you bookended each other, it was the perfect logical summation of, let's just admit it, all the historical shenanigans that we've been told.
Hmm.
You know, you and Joe did this wonderful God, what was the first one? Like 3 hours and 49 minutes breakdown of what's his name? Gunther?
Gunnar
Uh
Heinzen, yeah, the German.
Gunnar.
He's an odd guy, Gunnar Heinzen, because he's sadly passed away last year, so we can't actually talk to him in
Right.
person, and we only just discovered his work. But he did that conference in 2016 in Toronto, and he couldn't even make it to the conference because of his ill health. So he did a show with his son at a studio
Mm-hmm.
instead, with a presentation on the screen, and sent that in to be showed at the conference in Toronto. But he's like a statistician, an economist, and about like a historical enthusiast basically, and he created his own
Mm-hmm.
new alternative chronology, which is off the back of quite a few people. You know what I mean? He kind of
Right.
is building his work off of other historical revisionists, shall we say? And yeah, he believes that if you go to the first millennia, you can just basically take 700 years out of the first 1,000 years of history from AD. It doesn't exist. There is no
Mm-hmm.
700 years worth of history in the 1,000 year period. What we can make up is about 300 years worth of history, which can be documented and traced, but 700
Mm-hmm.
years just isn't there. And he says if you just take 700 years out, basically the first century AD, classically known, is exactly the same as 8th century AD. It's the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same time period, and all the events that happen between the first century going into what we call the 9th century. So that 700-year period was basically about maybe 100 years or so of change and development, then sudden
Mm-hmm.
destruction, absolute sudden destruction. So like a takeover of Christendom, and then absolute destruction, and then an explosion of Christendom after the destruction. Um, and it's fascinating work. I mean, it's just simple things like talking about there's no evidence that Paul was anywhere in Asia Minor in the first century. There's no historical
Mm-hmm.
documentation of somebody called Paul or Saul walking around Asia Minor starting churches, which is what all the letters and gospels of Paul are, him writing letters to the churches he established in Asia Minor and all throughout the Mediterranean. But there's no evidence that anywhere historically from the first century that anyone of that name was going around doing anything of the sorts. It just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
exist. So that would say, well, Paul didn't exist. Historically speaking, you have to then conclude it's all a lie. But then when you look at the 8th century in Asia Minor, which is Turkey, basically modern day Turkey, how you would
Mm-hmm.
describe Asia Minor today, there is a huge explosion of Paulicians followers who are following the doctrine of Paul. And it's kind of that's what they called themselves, Paulicians.
of Paul Stobbs.
No. So basically, they were following the teachings of Christ as dictated by Paul. You know, the Paulicians were starting. He was going around starting churches. There's only an explosion of people believing this in Christ in the 8th century in Asia Minor. It's because the first century and the 8th century are the same time. Paul was
Mm-hmm.
wandering around spreading those churches because those 700 years don't exist. They've been added into the timeline. So what me and JT, like you said, we just kind of went through the entire presentation. So I took the presentation and I added subheadings between each segment, so it was easier to digest, and we could do 10 minutes at a time for commentary because it is a bit of a meaty presentation. And I basically added subheadings. I removed a 2-minute segment where he word for word verbatim repeated himself. I think he was supposed to take it out. I think his son was supposed to take it out in editing, but forgot. So I just removed that bit just for flow. And I moved one piece about the Vikings earlier because he was already talking about the Vikings in that one segment, then brought them up randomly later on. I just took that random piece and put it back where it belonged. So it all kind of flowed
Okay.
succinctly. So nothing was taken away. I didn't change his beliefs. I didn't edit it to twist anything. You know, you can go watch the full proper thing on my channel, but then you can watch this edited version, which me and JT went through. And it took us 3.5 hours on a live show to go through every single point and interject what we understood and what we knew and how that worked with our theory to do this millennial kingdom of Christ, and how it kind of answers a lot, like a lot about our historical timeline and where the corruption has been placed and why we're so confused and why it's hard for people to believe that Christ has reigned for 1,000 years, because we have this perception that it was 2,000 years ago when Christ wandered and ruled, and he wasn't actually that long ago. It brings Christ 800 years closer to us, when you really think about it, you know, and it's an incredible find. So yeah, we did that breakdown and it's gone viral. The breakdown we did alone went viral, and then JT took the 3-hour podcast and broke it into 3 digestible 1-hour segments
Right.
on his channel, and they too have kind of gone viral and spread the idea. And really, you know, when we found this, we were like, it made it real all of a sudden. You know what I mean? Because we've been talking and speculating for a long time about this millennial kingdom of Christ thing, and we're playing around in the realms of what ifs and buts and speculation. Oh, this is interesting and fascinating, but maybe we're wrong. Who knows? And then we find this evidence, and we're like, hang on, this is
Right.
real. This is real now. This is actually tangible evidence that what we're saying is actually correct. Like this really did happen. And he goes through the science and the mainstream archaeological understandings to get to his evidence. This isn't a guy who believes in the millennial reign of Christ. This isn't even a Christian saying these things. And even he can't understand. He's like, all we know is we have a massive destruction that wipes out 90% of the population in the first millennia, and then an explosion of monasteries afterwards. And all the people knew is it was after Christ. That's all they knew. Like there was just nothing else on their mind after that point. And we just see a complete control takeover of Christendom after that point. 1,000-year reign, shall we say, the Byzantine Empire included. You know what I mean? It's just everything suddenly became Rome, complete conversion, sudden conversion to Christianity, you know, and it's all just seems so instant. But they make it out like it happened slowly over like 700 years in mainstream history. But when you take those 700 years out, it didn't happen slowly. There was Christ, there was chaos, there was destruction, and then there was new Christian Roman Empire and 1,000-year reign of Christ all over the earth after that. It was, at least 1,000-year reign of Christendom, Christian theology, Christian law, Christian ideology, all throughout everywhere. Complete takeover, and it's just incredible. It was an incredible find, and like I said, it made it very, very, very real for us when we found it.
The thing that he said to me, that really, there were 2 points that he said that really hit it home for me. Number one was that there was no, let's say there was 700 years between the 1st and 8th century, there was literally no change in construction techniques. There was no adaptation. There was no nothing. And I know, like, just as a builder over 15 years, how much my process has changed. Actually, over 17 years, my process has completely changed and evolved. So to say that over 700 years that there was no real evolution in the building techniques or the structures, there was like nothing new in vogue for 700 years makes zero sense to me.
No, well, they were trying to say things like, well, you know, they in the 8th century they built exactly how they built in the 1st century because they were doing an early antiquity revival. It's kind of what they were using the same slates, the same stone, the same style, and it's kind of they tried to claim they were reusing old roof tiles, and it's kind of like, well, who does that? Who makes a sound structure by reusing extremely old, used, leaky roof tiles? You wouldn't do that. It's because these things aren't made in the 8th century and in a revival. They are 1st century architecture. It all happened in the same time, and it's kind of people don't realize just how far and wide what we call the Roman Empire truly was at that time. Every corner of the earth was covered by this architecture, And it explains in the Bible that's what happened with the fourth beast. The fourth beast was covered the whole earth, every
Yes.
corner, and Rome,
Hmm.
as we call it, so called, was that thing. And I think our image today, our perception of Rome today is, um, red brush hat, wearing soldiers with red shields in a phalanx position, going around just in the like in the Mediterranean somewhere, and spreading out. And it's kind of it's more complex than that. It was more like a Borg collective, should we say.
Yes.
There was many,
Yes.
many nations who still maintained their own identity, but were a part of the Roman collective. They were part of that empire. Rome went out and brought people into their combine, shall we say? You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And then it says, you work with us and we'll work with you and we'll share technology and knowledge, and but you answer to Rome now. And a lot of places, it seemed, did willingly do so, because there was been many benefits to being a citizen of Rome, to be a part of Roman membership, to this worldwide empire which dominated everywhere. And we're finding this is what people call Tartaria.
Yes.
This is the advanced ancient civilization everyone's pointing to with their amazing technology. But what the Tartarians have done is they've blended into all of that the architecture that was also built after Rome during the millennial reign, as though it's all part of
Mm-hmm.
the same empire. In a way, what I've discovered is, and you can explain this in Daniel 7, in his prophecies, talking about the fourth beast kingdoms. He specifically says towards the end of Daniel 7, the beasts will lose their kingdoms and it will be given to the saints.
That's such
And
a tell. That
and
is
it
such a tell.
so that's why we still have, even after the destruction of tribulation, there were some buildings remaining from Rome, from this empire, which are scattered all over the place, in places they shouldn't be. We have the same Roman style pillared architecture in Japan as we have in Honduras. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's the same pantheonistic, multi-column pillared triangular tops, domes tops,
Yeah.
basilica style everywhere. And within what was left after utter destruction of tribulation, when the millennial kingdom was established, it was an upgrade in building style. And
Hmm.
I think the first early monasteries were being built in a traditional Roman style with the Roman arch, which is the curved arch, the semicircle. And then suddenly we have the new leap in advancement in architectural style, which is Gothic cathedrals, Gothic
Hmm.
architecture, which it makes things grander and taller, and seems to incorporate a lot more cymatics and frequency and designs into the rose windows, and the very structure of the building itself becomes a resonance frequency vibrational tool of some kind. And I think this is where the godly architecture started to be built after the Roman Empire, right
I
next to the Roman ruins. So, but
I can
these,
get
go ahead, sorry.
I can give you some insight into that because I build both types of domes. And when you look at a Gothic arch, or what's also known as a lancet arch, it's half of a Vesica Pisces. And pretty much anybody that's watching this or listening to this would be familiar with what a Vesica Pisces looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Vesica Pisces, the Jesus fish. That's, I don't know if you guys have that over in Britain.
Yeah, it's a fish. It looks like a fish. Yeah, it's the same thing when you cross two circles together.
Exactly.
That thing in the middle is the Vesica Pisces, and they remove the edges of the circles to leave a little tail.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, Lancet Arch is half of a Vesica Pisces. So that would be wonderful, like, signature of the architect or the mason to say, this is devoted to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Vesica Pisces was the merging of the spheres. The merging of the heavenly sphere with the physical sphere, and then you ended up with the Pisces fish or the Vesica Pisces, and then having half of that be your load bearing component in your masonry work. It has a male resonance. So this is where it gets a lot of fun. When you have a hemisphere, something that's just half of a ball, that actually has a female energy because it takes whatever energy is outside of it and pulls it to the center, the double convex curve like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have the half of the Vesica Pisces and you're in a lancet arch
Mm-hmm.
or these Gothic arches, the energy shoots up straight up. So
Interesting.
one is a transmitter and one's a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, like, I hear all these people talking in Antiquitech, like I'm somebody that's building modern day, like it's a literal thing where you can measure the resonant capacities of these structures. Just look at the work of Tanya Harris. She's a fellow British British Isles genius. Um, Her work in going into the six different cathedrals and measuring the resonant pattern and seeing that the resonant pattern of the cathedral actually matches the what are the windows that are right over the main doors? What do they call that? Like the rows. It's like the every single cathedral has like this circular cymatic window right above their front door. They call it like the rose window or something like that. I'm
I
forgetting
think
that.
you're right. I think you're right. I think it is a rose window. I think that's what they call them. Yeah.
What was crazy in her work, which she did like 12 years ago, she was able to show that the bass resonant harmonic, the cymatic harmonic of each one of the cathedrals matched
Mm-hmm.
the rose window.
They're usually always facing west, I think, as well. If I remember correct, I could be wrong though. No, or was it east? No. The Lincoln Cathedrals is facing east, so I assume they're all facing east. If I remember
So
correctly.
so I mean the math and the geometry and
Mm.
the harmonics. I just love this. I love this discussion because I keep trying to tell my audience when you build a dome or when you go into these old antiquitech structures, it's a different consciousness. This is not being built by wage slaves.
Mm.
This is being built by inspired people.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I agree.
It, yeah, yeah, and you have spires from inspiration. Like that's what you get when you're not under the oppression, And that's why I wanted to bring this back into the consciousness of my audience is because this whole notion of being under the thumb of, let's just say, the ruler of this of this domain, right?
Mm.
I want to get into the theology a little bit of what the implications from the Bible are relative to the little season. Because in my interviews, I come across a lot of people that are detractors of even the notion that there was a physical Jesus Christ. I come across detractors of just the whole notion that we could even be subjected to some externalized evil in general.
Mm.
So I want to make this super logical because one thing that is not logical for me is like we're just talking about. You have a 700-year gap from first to 8th century where everything is supposedly static and nothing changes. And by the way, people, the way they were building in the first century relative to the 8th century wasn't easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like this technology was just like, hey, we got some, donkeys and some carts. Let's like haul millions of pounds of marble. Like that's totally an unfeasible thing. It's not logical. So let's put the logic to the timeline along with the histrionics of the Bible. Let's go. If we're talking about Armageddon is 70 AD, because that's what your channel and what JT is talking about was like the sacking of Jerusalem was the Armageddon event. Let's start there and like build a logical timeline to where we are now.
Well, I've been trying to figure it out. I'm not saying I've got all the answers here necessarily, but from what I can tell, there was Christ came.
Mm-hmm.
He died at 33, and then there was a time of Pentecost, a time of the spreading of the gospel of the Holy Spirit coming down, and the gifts of the Spirit being given to his apostles, and for all of them to go out there and spread the word far and wide to all corners of the earth, which Paul claimed that he took a part in doing and has been completed in his time. And then he was pretty adamant, and all of them were pretty adamant, like the apostles were certain Christ is coming back any minute. It is imminent. Imminent.
Imminent.
Okay. Not in a future generation, 2,000 years from now. All the apostles were 100% adamant and were warning people. Even Paul was saying to people, don't have kids. Do not have children. it will be worse when tribulation comes if you have children. You're better off just not, because he's going to come at any second. Okay, and it seems like he did in 70 AD. Chariots of fire were seen in the sky, armies coming down from heaven, bringing utter destruction upon Jerusalem and the temple, including a huge sacking of said place in Jerusalem by Rome. So Rome went in there and completely burnt the place down, decimated the place. And I think Josephus even talked about the abomination of desolation happening within the temples, because the Rome came in and they sacrificed like 3 animals in the temple and things like this, and they sacrificed their pagan gods in there. And I'm pretty sure it was described by this Jewish historian as an abomination during the desolation of Jerusalem. Okay, so all prophecy
Yes.
seemed to get fulfilled in that one moment, and no more was Jerusalem, which JT describes as the harlot who rides the beast. So
Right.
The Jews who crucified Jesus, basically those who rejected the Messiah, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, those who turned against Christ and refused to see him as the savior that they wanted, because they wanted like a conquering king who would come and bring war against Rome and establish Jewish supremacy over everything. Instead, they got a meek and humble servant. So they didn't like that, so they didn't accept Christ, and they basically teamed up with Rome to do everything they can to attack Christians. Yeah, that's basically what happened for a long time. So that was the harlot who was riding the beast. Okay, and was drunk with power and the wine and the blood of the martyrs, and was killing and persecuting Christians who these first century Jews saw as blasphemous, evil people who are making a mockery of their religion. So they didn't appreciate the early first century Christians. But then Jerusalem gets laid waste and destroyed. And then we're told there's a lot of history from then on of early church fathers establishing creeds and all these type of things, and a slow takeover of Christendom even after this fact of this separated tribes all over the place of Christians, churches growing, and Romans being confused. Like, I don't understand what am I supposed to do with these Christians, because they're not breaking any laws, but like they're really peaceful. And it's kind of at the same time, this seems odd. You got like the writings of Pliny the Younger, for example. He's talking about writing to the Caesar. He's like, I just want to ask if I'm doing the right thing, because I don't know what to do with these guys. Like, I've punished them this way, but at the same time, they're not breaking any laws as far as I can see. But this seems to be some kind of odd thing which isn't going away. And they were really like, the Romans didn't know what to do, apparently. And we have all this documented history, but the dates are not as quite as certain, I think, as we've been told. I think
Right.
a lot of it can be condensed down to maybe 150 years worth of history from Christ being born, not spread out over 500 years, because we're told there was first in the first century there was the invasion of I think it's the Visigoths and the barbarian tribes from Europe coming down and basically sacking Rome and destroying Roman civilization. And that was the disaster of the first century that we're told. And then we're told there was this slight period of growth of Christians, and Roman empires were slowly getting less power and hold. And then there was a sudden destruction in 536 AD during the time of Constantine, where the sun went black, volcanoes went off, crops died, a mini ice age, earthquakes everywhere, a plague, people dropping like flies, millions dying, bodies being tipped into the sea because we don't know what to do with them. Just an awful event happened in 536, we're told. And then there was another quiet period of time between 536 and then the 700s, 750 AD, around that time. And then we're told in that time there was another similar disaster. A volcano erupted in Iceland. They think is what happened, again causing famine, plague, death, and misery as far as China. But Gunnar Heinzen explained that those 3 events are one event. They're not separated over 700 years. That is tribulation, judgment coming upon all those who rejected Christ. And obviously it is a tribulation style event when you actually just look at these, just look at the descriptions of these events. It's awful. It's 90% of the population wiped out. Hardly anyone survives. All the volcanoes are popping off for the first time, it seems. No one
for the first time.
Yeah, no one
like,
really kind of.
That's mind blowing. Like this, like. Have you done any more research to see if in any other cultures, like maybe the Maori or like even on the other side of the world?
I think lava coming out of the ground had kind of been a known thing. I don't think it was like
Yes.
it wasn't the first time this had happened. It's a natural phenomena, just like floods have always been a natural phenomenon before the Great Flood. It's kind of a thing, It's not like people didn't understand that there's great power there, but I think the Bible never documented volcanoes. It was never anywhere in the Bible was it mentioned what a volcano was. People think that in the Revelation of John, he's trying to describe what a volcano is when he's talking about one of the judgments of the vows, where it's like they had like tails like serpents and these type of things, trying to describe lava flows and the spitting of lava, and they had mouths like lions and this type of thing. I think it's like he's trying to describe like a volcano erupting or something, is what people are trying to interpret it as. But there's no real mention of the word volcano, and the word volcano comes from the word Vulcan, which is the god of fire in Rome, I think. And even that wasn't formally called that until the 1600s. So it's just strange. It's very strange. It's like no one's really documented or bothered to talk about volcanoes until Pompeii. It's kind of like what that was a first century destructive event, you know what I mean? And I think that's just the one that everyone focuses on is the most popular. But I think it seems like all the volcanoes on the earth erupted all at once. It was a trial by fire, destruction by fire as promised. First it was a flood, and God said the next one will be fire. And I think that's what we
Right.
got. And that came with an ice age because the sun was blocked out through all the ash in the air, which caused the crops
Mhm.
to fail, which caused the temperatures to drop, which caused famine and then caused disease. All the judgments coming upon the four judgments of the horsemen coming upon everybody. Everything's described as happening in these three separate events, but they've separated them. And that's where the deceit kind of comes into it. We can equate it all to one event that happened sometime around 77 AD, something like that. Roughly give
So
or take, not long after the destruction of the temple did this suddenly happen. And that brings Constantine into the first century now.
right.
This is no longer in the fifth century for sixth century. This is now first century stuff. It changes everything. And by a historical, normal mainstream standard, that is unacceptable, as Gunnar Heinsohn would say. But by our conspiracy theorist Christian perspective and understanding the lies and trying to fit the reign of Christ into all of this, yeah, that makes sense. It all makes sense that it was one event, and that was tribulation as promised to happen in the prophecy of Revelation. And then it seems like after that settling down, not many survivors, there was then the establishment of Christendom on earth. We call it the 8th century when it really kicked off, or the 5th century, kind of, where Rome kind of got involved. But really, this is all happening in the 1st century, still the back end of the 1st century. And then it seems there was 1,000 years then, which we call the medieval period by our standards. And
Right.
that would be traditionally understood as the millennial reign of Christ, 1,000-year period where Christendom reigned supreme. But we've been told it's a destructive, horrible time where medicine ceased, science ceased, death and famine was everywhere, religious dogma and burning people and killing people for the Inquisition. All the horrible things started to happen, in this medieval period. People were dying at the age of 30, losing all the teeth, all this type of thing. It was a horrible time to be alive. No one wants to be around in the Middle Ages. Aren't you glad you lived in this modern age today where everything's wonderful? But when you actually understand that this was the reign of Christ, it probably wasn't as horrible as we've been told. It probably was a relative time of peace on earth compared to what we're dealing with today, to be honest. There may have been minor skirmishes between like warring kings here and there, but nothing on the scale of what we have to deal with today, I don't think. And
So
you know,
can I interject
sure.
something real?
Yeah, go.
So one of the things that I've studied because I got really into geopolymers. Have you ever heard of what a geopolymer is?
It's not a mix of different stones and aggregates to create some kind of cement or a new stone,
Yeah,
a new
yeah.
solid stone. Yeah,
The best way to call it is Roman cement.
Roman cement.
Before people use the term geopolymer, you had all these masons that were trying to fix these old buildings from the Roman antiquity,
Mm.
and they were finding that their Portland-based binders did not like to affix to the old, much, much harder and stronger Roman
Mm.
cement. And I went to school. There's a gentleman, Joseph Davidovitz in France, that he figured out that essentially, oh, they used a totally different type of cement process, which we now call a geopolymer, where essentially when the binder catalyzes, it catalyzes through an acidic reaction, not an alkaline reaction like today's. That's why today's concrete doesn't affix to the old stuff. Well, that's a huge problem, especially if you're most of your capital buildings in the world are these wonderful Romanesque,
Mm-hmm.
structures, because like a lot of these buildings, you'll see the patchwork that they try and do, and it's horrible. It doesn't work
Mm-hmm.
until they figured out the geopolymer aspect. Well, when they first were making geopolymers, or when they first were figuring out the the concoction, like how could they make a superior cement in the old world, they found this substance in that was in all of the Roman architecture in Rome, had this stuff in it called pozzolanic ash. And
Mm-hmm.
that was ash from the volcano of Pozzolan. And that was a catalyzer. That was like the main catalyzer mixed with like a bunch of different aggregates that would be the binder to bring all these things to make this superior, Roman cement. And so to me, I'm thinking that I haven't done the research on it. I would like to know if there was ever any historical writings about the volcano Pozzolan popping off before 70 AD.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm
I
saying?
don't know. I wouldn't. I've not done enough research into that myself exactly. I just obviously someone a young lady called Nicolette from a channel called Biblically Based kind of brought the idea to me to begin with about this idea that volcanoes seem to be a relatively new phenomena in human history. But
Yes.
I do think there have been, because a volcano, a mountain, is just a lot of erupting lava solidifying over and over again. That's what how you get a mound. Eventually turns into like a pyramid
Mhm.
shaped thing. I don't deny there may have been flat versions of that around. Do you know what I mean? Before they turned into mountains like we have today,
Mhm.
it's likely they turned into volcanic mountains during this tribulation period, perhaps. But prior to that,
Yeah.
molten lava and things that came out of the ground, but weren't, they were just little mounds by that point. They weren't these giant
Mhm.
pyramidal, horrendously like imposing things we see today, which could kill us at any moment. They were
Mhm.
just a heat phenomenon coming out of the ground. That's what I imagine. I don't know though, but I'll have to look into it. Maybe you can make a video on that, or tell me what you find, because it is fascinating. And that's just
I'm
it's one tidbit, to pile on to the information we're gathering here. So it is interesting.
well, I'm totally looking into it because you got to understand, as somebody that believed the normal historical narrative until I read Anatoly Fomenko's
Mm-hmm.
new chronology. Like I read that 15 years ago, and it was a hard read. It wasn't the easiest thing for me, but I in college I was into statistics. I loved the statistical mind of the law of averages and things like that. And in his work, he kind of primed the pump for me to let go of the historical narrative, because he's like, okay, number one thing, if history was as long as they say it is say we're in the year 2000, we would have like 14 billion people
Mm-hmm.
here. Even
Yeah.
with all the murders and all the wars and all that stuff, people reproduce at a much greater rate.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, so that's the first big tell. The second big tell is like we found the algorithm of them repeating the same story over and over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And look, in their own historical writings, the I is not a one. Like
Mm-hmm.
we can prove that, the scavengers, as they were like collating all of this data and then refeeding it back to us, they're the ones that changed the I into one. The one isn't a one. Like
Mm-hmm.
there isn't. They added 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And so there are three main points. So I'm open to this, there being less time. And then
Mm-hmm.
hearing this gentleman say, like, all these cities that we find built on top of other cities, built on top of other cities, it doesn't go lower than
No,
the
no.
Roman stuff.
The strata is quite clear, because if it had been this long, you would see Rome, and then you on top of that
Right.
you would see like a layer of soil, and then a new civilization kind of built on top of that, and then another layer of
Right.
like because over hundreds of years, that's just tends to be what happens. Like things layer on top
Yeah.
of the other, and you see buildings kind of lay, or at least buildings underground a little bit in this type of thing. Um, we don't see any of that. There's one layer and it's
None.
Rome. It's just one layer. There's nothing underneath. It doesn't go any further
Right.
back than Rome, at least in Europe anyway. From what he was saying, what did he do? 35,000 dig sites, I think he went through, or so like it was something
That's
stupid.
all.
It was something stupid all throughout Europe and all. The number was high, and he basically was researching and compiling all of them, and not one of them said there was anything underneath what they were uncovering at these Roman sites. Nothing under the strata, no strata, nothing at all. So that's extremely telling. Do you
It
know what I
is.
mean? That's like it goes against what we've been told. The evidence is obvious that there was Rome, a disaster which buried it under a lot of dirt. Most of it, some of it didn't, but a lot of it was buried. And then like a squatting lesser civilization kind of rebuilt on top of it. And then bang, suddenly this extremely advanced civilization appears not long after that, which is building Gothic architecture. It's just, I
Mhm.
mean, the only thing I can think that explains that odd chain of events is the beast system, sudden destruction, tribulation, judgment. The remnants try to rebuild. The saints come with Christ and establish a millennial reign and show them how to really do it. That's the only thing I can think of in terms of a logical step process that would account for the architecture that suddenly appeared. It's the only thing.
Here's another great tidbit that another brilliant British Isles gentleman figured out. Actually, a couple. They've pretty much figured out the Great Wall of China is Roman.
Yeah, interesting.
Like when you see how it was built, like other than the accoutrement that's on it now that makes it quote unquote Chinese,
Mm,
the literal build style, where they put their garrisons, the spacing from one checkpoint to the next checkpoint was precisely the way the Romans did it. And
interesting.
by the way, they found the same one. They call it the Great Wall of Mississippi along the Mississippi River. Guess what? There's a wall that was buried that has the same dimensionality of the Great Wall of China. And what they've been
Identical.
able, identical, except it runs north to south instead of east to
Interesting.
west. And so this is obvious to me that the Romans, like you said, were the Borg. Resistance was futile. They were the beast that covered the entire world. They did allow there to be, different dialects and different whatever, but everybody paid tribute to Rome,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Render
All
unto
roads.
render unto Caesar what is his. Christ said it himself. Like he came during the peak of this empire. You know, you have to understand. He contextualizes Christ in a whole new way. You have to
It
realize
does.
this. Like when he came, Rome was everywhere. It established the whole earth, and he came to put an end to this, the greatest civilization that the earth has ever seen. Like it's kind of, and he did through a sacrifice rather than through war. You have to
Mhm.
think like how incredible that truly is. He destroyed an entire empire through his sacrifice and through his message. Like it was unstoppable. Like again, the inspiration he gave his disciples was unstoppable. And it's kind of it's an incredible story, and it just again the contextualization of that when you realize the extent of Rome is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And we will look again in Gunnar Heinsohn's presentation, and what me and Joe were kind of emphasizing on is like things like Vikings, for example. They had Roman ships, identical
Yes.
square sails to Roman ships. And we're supposed to be told that during this time, they didn't have sails, or they forgot how to, they were rowing basically. They weren't using square sails until the 8th century. We're told that Vikings didn't know how to sail on the sea with a sail until the 8th century. But there are coins from the 1st century with Roman ships on them showing
Mhm.
sails that had been to these regions where the Vikings were. So you tell me none of
Mhm.
these Vikings looked at these coins and went, What's that on that boat? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Maybe we should start until the 8th century, like 7th. Are you joking? Like it's kind of that doesn't make any sense. It's because the Vikings were using square sails in the 1st century, and they were identical to Roman ships and sails because they were part of the Roman Empire. They were their
Mhm.
own people. They had their own systems and beliefs and customs, but they also adopted the Roman technology, and they did the work of Rome, and they, it seems like, made a trip to America and established a lot of American architecture and civilizations in those times in the 1st century as well. And they paved the way for Rome to get over there and do their thing. It seems it's all working in tandem. It's kind of, what would Rome do but use an extremely advanced seafaring people to go and do that particular task for them? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of
Right.
it's advantageous to have the Vikings or the Six Kings, shall we say, in their on their side because they are an amazing sailing people who know how to sail, and we need to send our ships out west to go and take over that particular area. You know what I mean? It's kind of it's advantageous. And even then, we're starting to realize now. I'm not even sure that the geographical landscape is the same as it was today either. And quite literally, I think the continents were a lot closer to each other.
Yes.
I think tribulation was a truly destructive event that separated lands from each other. So Rome managed to establish its every corner of the earth because everything was closer together then. Like, South
Mhm.
America, you look at even just today's modern map, South America fits into Africa perfectly. It's a puzzle
Yes,
piece.
it does. It is.
And all the coastline attaches to all the American continents, to north and south, to the European and African side perfectly. You bring them close together, they are a perfect match for one another. And something else I was looking into, but there's these things in the northwest of England, where I'm from, in the northern parts of England up to Scotland, and these brick walls made with stone piles, and they're earthquake proof. You know how they build these different shaped stones on top of each other, and when there's an earthquake, they all just lock in place and don't move, type of thing. No grit between them, no grout, nothing. Just stacked up stone walls, and they run for miles. There's like 52,000 kilometers worth of stone walls just all over the UK for some reason, in this particular region, and they're just dividing up lines. They're in proper arbitrary places as well, and in the middle of forests on top of hills. And it's kind of like, who the hell put that up there, and why? What was the reason for that wall? But then if you
Mhm.
look over into New England in America, they have the
Same,
exact
same.
same walls, but they have like 102,000 kilometers worth of them all mapped out. That's what they know and don't have documented. And they have these odd sacrificials, the Stonehenge of New England, they call it, and all these type of things. And it's the same slate stone, it's the same stack style, it's the same everything, because in New England and what we call the north of England was probably connected at some point in the ancient past. They were probably right next to each other, if not the same land, which has somehow drifted away from each other. And we call it the continental drift. They call this place Pangea in secular thought, which is sort of
Mhm.
millions of years ago, billions of billions, millions of years ago, before the Earth became what it is today. All the continents were together as one landmass, they tell us. Or 1,350 years ago, it was all one landmass, is what we're actually finding. And tribulation separated it all and separated the Roman Empire, the Beast Kingdom, from each other, which explains why Honduras have the exact same Parthenon style pillared buildings as Rome.
Yes.
Like, why? Because they would have been right next to each other originally, maybe 200, 300 meters away, kilometers away from each other, not 2,500 kilometers like they are today, separated by vast oceans. It probably wouldn't have been the case. And he said, tribulation literally is a earthquakes everywhere, every volcano going off, tsunamis left, right, and center, everything popping off all at once is basically
Mhm.
tribulation. And I think a lot of that was caused by the land just tearing apart,
Mhm.
opening up these fissures, which cause lava to come out in the oceans as well as the land. And you find
Mhm.
like Pliny the Elder, for example, this 1st century Roman um, legionnaire, leader of a region, shall we say, something like that. He had his son Pliny the Younger. Apparently, someone was telling me you can read his writings, and he is investigating what has turned the oceans salty. Okay, perhaps it was all the minerals and rocks that were being spurted out from the volcanic eruptions happening underneath the oceans. Like it's probably something like that, and that would account for a third of the ocean life being killed. Volcanoes going off everywhere. The whole landscape of the earth changed, like literally within the 3.5 year, 7 year period. It was done. It was just utterly decimated. And what
Well,
we go,
the different geologists that I've listened to that are actually are not nominalists. They're not people that are trying to keep the what's it called when they try and keep everything the status quo. These are the catastrophists. These are the
contrarians.
no, it's they have this saying for people that are trying to essentially exclude catastrophe from history.
No, I don't know.
So
I'm not sure about that one.
I've listened to a few geologists that believe in catastrophe, and they're of the mind that the Rockies and the Andes and the West Americas was a very quick catastrophic event.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, tectonic plates pushing against each other and slowly lifting
Yeah,
and anything like that. It was much more like if there was a Pangea, let's say, and there was this incredible, tribulation event, and then the everything's expanding because if you had all the volcanoes going off, the heat, all these things, the tumult would have been incredible. You have this shifting of everything. It's almost like whatever the barrier was to the outside as that spreading was occurring, the Americas hit that kind of, and just everything just started to go up
yeah,
because there,
I can see
there's
that. Yeah, yeah.
there's
Go ahead.
there's so many maps of California being an island. Well, it's not an
Mm-hmm.
island anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
maybe it maybe it maybe it got squoze up against the greater continent. Who knows?
all of that entire part of America raised itself because of the pressure of being pushed from another thing, and that ocean just disappeared. And now it's all one landmass for all we know. It's what we live on today. It seems like is not the same geographical map that they had. It's not the same. It's something else. That's why there's so many civilizations underwater. We're finding ruins just underwater. You know what I mean? It's because they were visible at some point. They were a part of everything. It's incredible to think about, but it's also kind of scary because like most think about this, most modern day Christians who are in the futurist mindset are waiting for tribulation to happen. They want
Yes.
judgment to come upon the earth, and they think they're going to get whisked away into the clouds and they're not going to have to deal with it because they're the chosen ones who get to rule with Christ for 1,000 years, that type of thing, when he establishes his kingdom, which they think is eternal and doesn't end, and there is no little season because they don't even know the little season exists half the time. But they want tribulation to come, and they're like, well, you got nothing to fear as long as you've got Christ, everything's fine. It's kind of like, do you understand just how horrible that event was when you actually look into history? If this is what it was, it's like I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy. I would not, and I certainly wouldn't want to witness that happening. Even if I'm just chilling with a
No.
pina colada on a cloud, like whatever you think is going on, you know what I mean? I would not want to be. It's. I'm glad we're past it. Is what I'm trying to say here. Like
Yes.
it's not pleasant. Like it's nothing like that has ever happened and will ever happen again. Thank God. Like that is something else. It's truly something else. And the descriptions of these events from the early Middle Ages, so Middle Antiquity, late Antiquity, and early, this first millennium, it's horrible. The descriptions of these events is truly awful. Like you couldn't imagine. You don't have to imagine. You can go read the accounts of people who were around during this time, and it seems like there was just this. It's a reset more than anything, and I don't think we also understand just how advanced Rome was, or what we call Rome. I mean, it's kind of
Yes.
it's a misnomer to say it was just Rome, because people have this image in their mind of what that was. It was the beast,
Right.
the fourth beast kingdom. It was unprecedented. It was
Hmm.
diverse. It's described as more diverse than any kingdom that came upon it before, because it is an amalgam of multiple cultures all slapped together. It's a one world culture. It's the new world order, essentially. It is all together as
Hmm.
one, with one mind type of idea. That's what the fourth beast was, and that's what they're trying to reestablish again today in the little season. By the way, we live in New Rome.
Yes.
That's why they inhabit all the Capitol buildings are Roman. they didn't care about the Gothic places. They left them to rot,
Nope.
and they're still rotting today and decaying and disappearing and being demolished or turned into nightclubs and high-rise flats or something like that, and ready because they don't care about. They want to erase that culture that came after Rome. They want to reestablish Rome
Mhm.
today in the little season. So there is that as well. But yeah, You get what I'm saying. I'm rambling on now. Rome was
No,
way more advanced than we can understand, and we lived after that for a short period of time. People were back to horse and buggy. People were back to basics, the most
Paul,
basics, you know. And then
I,
millennial kingdom came, which super advanced humanity tenfold, way past what Rome had. And
yes.
then something happened, and we're back to horse and buggy again. You know what I mean? That's basically what
So
happened. Yeah.
I am your dude because I am an expert with Roman cement. Like I've gone to school to learn how to make geopolymers. I know how to make it out of three different clay subsoils. Like, and I'm letting everybody out there know that the Roman cement has like four times the compression strength of our best concrete these days.
Mm.
It's a totally different thing. It's essentially like making your own igneous crystal rock. That's what it is. It's where like in today's cements, they're binding aggregate like sand and rock together. This would actually kind of fuse whatever the aggregate was into one homogeneous mixture. That's why it was so superior. And don't be fooled. The new Rome is using it too in a lot of their military bases. Like my mentor in that, like he gets hired by militaries all around the world to build their bases. That's who he's building for.
Mm-hmm.
So just so people have no like distortion in their consciousness around this they like to your point, they were technically incredible just to be able to move the amount of weight. Like I
Mm-hmm.
love, Joe brings this up all the time. It's like even if you were going to make like say a World's Fair out of plaster and lath, that's still a lot of weight. Like you're building a building that's 26 acres. It doesn't matter what you're building that building out of. You have to move the weight of the materials that are building that.
Mm-hmm.
It's shown throughout antiquity that the Romans, what were they actually the masters at first? Roads. Roman roads to this day are used.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if let's say the Great Wall of China was Roman, and let's say this Great Wall of Mississippi wasn't buried, that would be, like those. They're still like absolute to be able to build anything that lasts that amount of time. And we're talking about at least 13, 1400 years in the timeline that we're explaining.
Mm-hmm.
These are very, very advanced people.
Oh
So
yeah.
let's come into modern times because there's when the whole notion of orphan trains started to hit my mind. I couldn't square that at all, to use your terminology. Like I was like, where did all these kids come from? There weren't that many hookers that were having illegitimate children. Like, how could you have hundreds of thousands of new people? And
Mm-hmm.
then when Conspiracies Are Us brought up the Little Season, and then you guys started to talk about the Little Season, and it was like, wait a minute. Biblically speaking, what would be the point of releasing, the deceiver from the pit? What would be the point of that? Could you go into what the Bible says and like go through like how Revelation speaks about after the millennial reign, what was going to happen?
Yes. So in terms of, let's finish off the timeline. So, like I said, there was this time we call medieval period, which seemed to be a time of a new advancement of technology in the Gothic style, shall we say, and the establishment of a Christian empire on Earth. That did seem to dissipate and slowly get corrupted around the 1500 period. In England, specifically, the Tudor Empire began with the death and the usurping of King Richard III. Richard III is described as a evil, vindictive, cruel victor of the War of the Roses who murdered his own nephews in a tower to gain his kingship, and after his brother died, all these type of things. And it's kind of he killed the princes, the heirs, so he could be king. And you find out after the fact, this seems like Tudor propaganda to smear this man as evil because they took over, and to seem as the righteous victors over true evil. They created this smear campaign against Richard III. But if you actually look into the man and who he was, he's not perfect. He lived as a king. Kings have to do some pretty horrible things to maintain a power, but he was a pious man. He was a devout Christian man who would pray daily. He built many schools. He built many places for children, and for the sick and the widows and the elderly and all these type of things. He was very much a Christ-centric, focused, pious individual, and his mother was the same. And it seems like that was like the last true king of the millennial reign, because after that, the Tudors were the worst. I mean, Henry VIII destroyed like 800 monasteries in the UK, and then obviously changed the religion so he could have divorces and all these. So it became a real mess. You know what I mean? During that time, we see this moral decay start to kick in, and a coming away from a Christ-centric state where beauty is being created like Gothic cathedrals, and we're now going more towards a feudalistic domineering type attitude again. And I think it's around the Enlightenment period of the 1600s, because they say coming out of the 1500s when the Dark Ages ended, is what they say. But coming out of the Dark Ages of Christendom into the Age of Enlightenment, where you get the heliocentric model, you get the theory of evolution start to appear, and these early precursor ideas start to come around this time. Alchemy gets reestablished. You have like John Dee and all these type of things, and for the Queen Elizabeth I, it becomes a real odd time of occult magic scientism starts to kind of merge together, and it's become what it is today, which we have mainstream science and astrology and all these type of things, and we have the space doctrine now, and the evolutionary doctrine was all kind of only began in the Age of Enlightenment. And then the Revolutionary Wars began, the destruction of the monarchs all throughout Europe, throughout Russia, throughout America. It was just chaos, wars after wars, and Napoleonic Wars as well. It was civil war after major war. Massive shifts in movement and power began happening in the 1700s, 1800 periods. And then we had World War One, and then World War Two coming into the early 20th century. Utter destruction of the most beautiful cities that ever existed, complete rewriting history, the establishment of a particular state in the Middle East through the Balfour Declaration at the end of World War II. And now we have today full futurist dispensationalist doctrine, which comes out of the Reformation Protestant movement through John Darby and the rest. So it's kind of everything changed after that 15, 16 year 100 period. And that would have been the end of the millennial reign, which we call the 1500s. But if we, remove 700 years from that, that was all kind of happening around the 800s, the true 8th century, not the what we were talking about earlier. We're talking like 800 years towards the end of the reign of Christ to 900 years, moral decay sets in. And then we have the establishment of the little season, it seems, with the creation of America. Around that seems to be roughly when it happened, give or take, as we know it today. And we've been living. How old's America now? 250. How old is it? It's having its birthday soon, isn't it? You're muted, by the way. If you want to just.
It's 249 years old.
Yeah. So it seems like we are 249 years into the little season, if you want to call it anything, 1776. And obviously they have your mascot is Lucifer, the light bringer with the sun rays with a broken chain on his ankle, who's been released from the pit. You know what I mean? So he's kind of all there, I think, and it's a melting pot civilization, renewal of Roman Empire. It's basically what America is, and the establishment of that. And but it's not 1776. Remove 700 years. It's 1076, which is in 77 AD, 76 AD is when tribulation came. So the timing.
Dude, it's just it's too neat. It's too tidy. It's just so, and it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like it makes sense. I always, like, when I was coming up and I'd watch all these movies, like I started watching that show Vikings like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the thing that pissed me off about that show was the Vikings were getting into all these knockdown, drag out fights and everybody was dying, yet their population kept growing. Mm-hmm. And statistically, that doesn't happen. Like, I think it's something like statistically, if you take out 5 to 6% of the young male population, you get a real dip in the next generation's growth.
Mm-hmm.
right? And so growing up with Hollywood mesmerizing us with every movie about the past is just war after war after war. If that was the truth to the frequency that the let's just call it the deceiver would have us believe, none of us would be here.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can't happen that way.
No, it was a time of peace, relatively.
Yes.
It wasn't actually as what they tell us, and this is the thing. We have to start understanding. I explained to you there the amount of tumultuous civil war and destruction that happened in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. Like it was a bloody horrible time through and
Yes.
through for everywhere. A
Hmm.
complete restructuring and reorganization of civilization happened during our past 200 to 300 years worth of history that we've
Hmm.
documented, and we do have that relatively documented quite well. Actually, it's hard to fake most of that, but most of it's just war and death and destruction, because they were rewriting something, they were covering something up, and they're trying to rewrite and cover up what the previous 1,000 years were, which was a time of ultimate advancement and peace, where Christ
Hmm.
ruled supreme, and they wanted to reshape the earth in their image. So they had to take over the old buildings, rewrite history, create false history, as Fomenko proves with his work.
Hmm.
They just copy and pasted the same battles with different names over and over again to extend time and to make it
Yeah.
seem longer than it actually was. And like I said, the math doesn't add up, as the statistics don't add up for our population sizes. They've inserted phantom time that doesn't exist even after the fact, probably. And we can't fully trust our records even for the past 500 years. They've probably done some trickery around that too, but it's relatively, it seems right. But you have to understand, the winners wrote the history. The winners destroyed the evidences that we needed to prove that Christ had reigned for 1,000 years. They've had time to master it, and
Hmm.
now we live in a time of ignorance where we say there's never been a time in the last 2,000 years where there's been 1,000 years of peace on earth. That's what the reaction is now when you hear this, and it's kind of, no, you've been lied to. Yes, there was, and the evidence is in the fruits of that time, the buildings.
Hmm.
It's got people who were
Definitely.
killing people who were on horse and buggies, living in dung, dying at the age of 30 with no knowledge or time or resources to learn anything, who are backwards religious zealots who clearly haven't got any technological advancement whatsoever. Don't build cathedrals.
Hmm.
They don't do that
They do
stuff.
not.
They're surviving on a daily basis. They're just vying for bread. They're just doing whatever they can to get by, and they're just trying to keep the family line alive for as long as possible while trying to get food out the ground. If hopefully the winter doesn't kill them off, type of thing. You know what I mean? And that's not the evidence that we see. That's not the evidence we see. We see, and even look at the artwork from this time, never mind just the buildings, like people are dressed in extremely ornate clothing. People had pride in the way they looked. They were
Yes.
colorful, they were neat, they were tidy, they had swords, they were actually well off. And
Yes.
the moral standards were way higher than ours today. Like
Yes.
the concept of valor and honor and honesty and justice was strong in these civilizations, because they
Hmm.
had to be, because the king was the embodiment of all of those things. It was Christ. It was the Son of God, And it's kind of, I don't know if he was necessarily walking around physically at that time. Maybe he was. Who knows, truly. Or maybe he was just simply reigning from heaven, or maybe he was literally reigning at the center of the earth in the North Pole in a physical place called New Jerusalem, where the four rivers run from, Euphrates being one of them, not the Euphrates we have today. It's that kind of thing. Maybe that's what was going on. But we do know, what we can seem to see is that saints were everywhere, and they're documented all over throughout history. People with literal halos who were the emissaries of God on earth. So I
Hmm.
think that literally did happen. I think there were people who were an example for those who hadn't quite made it yet of what's to come. You will have your glorious resurrected body like we do in Christ. But right now, we're running the show. As it explains in Revelation quite clearly, there'll be 1,000-year reign of Christ and the saints. And then obviously the devil's locked up for 1,000 years during that time. So can you
Hmm.
imagine a world where there's no devil for 1,000 years?
Oh,
I mean, what would
I'm
what would people be able to accomplish in that time? Just simply
well.
people. Forget about the divinity side of it all. Just humans without that accuser over their shoulder, telling them they're not good enough, telling them they're evil, telling them that they don't deserve anything nice, turning brother against brother, and whispering in the ears of kings to judge people falsely, or just ruining people's lives, bringing out the worst in humanity, just by prodding and poking in the worst possible times and places, which is what the devil does. Imagine him just gone for 1,000 years. What could humanity achieve in that time? And I think, again, the architecture is a huge testament to what the people did achieve in that time. But we're told they were the worst off we've ever been. Those people
No,
are the least of us. We are far
no.
more advanced and happy today than they ever were, and we live longer and so forth. And I just don't think that any of that is true. I don't buy any of it. I think everything got exponentially worse in about 1550, as we call it today, onwards, something like that. And
Yes.
that wasn't the end of the reign, it was the tapering off of the reign. I don't think it was
Hmm.
suddenly just perfect all the way for the 1,000 years. I think as time went on, I think things got worse towards the back end of the
Hmm.
millennial kingdom, it seems. And Christ had to rule with an iron rod, as it's described. So
Yes.
he was keeping people in line. There was still rebellion during that time. Everything wasn't sunshine and lollipops for the millennial kingdom. There were those who didn't make the pilgrimage to Mount Zion to pay honor and take part in the feasts once a year.
Hmm.
That was all that was required. Come once a year, make a pilgrimage to my kingdom, to my city, and take part in the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay.
Yes.
If you don't, you will suffer drought in your region. So maybe only the kings of those regions had to go and do it. It wasn't even the
Right.
people, you know what I mean? And we see, like a third of the earth is nothing but desert. Okay.
Yes.
Could it be those are the nations who were in rebellion against God during the millennial reign? And did they remain there, festering in their own sin, creating their own false religions? Let's talk about Islam if you want to go along anything.
Yeah.
Who knows what was going on in these desert areas during this time? But they certainly weren't paying homage to the king. So maybe that's where the demons were, in dry places. Who knows? Maybe that's where they
The
were all dwelling.
jinn.
Yeah, maybe
The
that's where they were all
jinn.
dwelling during that time, because they
Yeah.
certainly weren't welcome in the kingdom of God. And it wasn't a perfect time as described in Zechariah and in Revelation. It was a Christ rule with an iron rod. There was consequences for not getting in line with the kingdom.
Right.
And then obviously it seems like the rebellion took over towards the back end of the millennial reign, and it seems like Christ and his saints receded. And it's not like
Hmm.
they left the earth necessarily. It's more like, well, let's give them over to their reprobate minds. It's that kind of, as God has always done. Even with the kingdom now right in front of them, they still rebel. So let's let them have it. Let's give them what they
Hmm.
want. Let's let Satan be loosed from his prison. Let's give them back the one. No, they want Satan. Let's give them Satan. And I think that's where we are now. We're in that time of the little season saying where he's been released, and we kind of asked for it in a way. You know.
There's I had asked about this in relation to, I actually didn't ask it clearly, but in relation to, let's say, the orphans,
Yeah.
in relation to, let's start the start of the 20th century.
Sure.
And right before the 20th century, we have this influx of people all throughout Europe and the Americas. And essentially, the industrial workforce, the industrialization, I can speak of this very, very succinctly within the United States, was people under the age of 14.
Oh yeah.
Like very, 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 very young people were the wage slave, and they,
Mm-hmm.
they were they were the ones that reindustrialized the cities and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you've brought up a lot that there is within Revelation them talking about, like, okay, there are those people that had died before Christ was ever, they never got to know Jesus Christ in their lifetime. And maybe the hypothesis is that maybe the little season of Satan is here so that those people that didn't get the chance to know Christ reincarnate, and or not, well, I guess it would be like a reincarnation. Let's just say they incarnate to actually get the chance to understand the love of God
Yeah, well,
primarily.
that was my working theory at the start of all of this for me a year ago in October. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know. I was trying to hash some ideas out.
Right.
And I still don't fully understand or know exactly what's going on in this little season. It was very vague. You don't get much information. In terms
Right.
of what we do know is there was this huge influx, like you said, of children who had no parents, which were
Hmm.
escorted all up and down the Americas on trains and dumped into cities and left to be the workforces of those cities during the industrial age. Child slave labor, basically, which is odd,
Exactly.
which is very odd. You know, where do all these kids come from? Where are their parents? But you also have simultaneously an extreme explosion of insane asylums at the same time, all run by the
Hmm.
Odd Fellows, the secret societies, of offshoots of Freemasonry. And their logo is two angels next to a globe, funnily enough. And they kind of also have three interlocking rings as the unbroken chain, or a chain, shall we say, as their logo. And they have a motto. It's what is it? Tend to the widows, teach the orphans, and bury the dead, something like that. So it seems like they were the cleanup crew, these odd fellows, and they're the ones who founded, or many of these asylums, which were castles and beautiful places. So they
Hmm.
found millennial architecture and claimed it for
Right.
their own. Basically, that's what free masonry is. It's literally just free real estate laying around everywhere, and they claimed ownership of it. And it seems like they filled them full of these people, these lunatics. How much in the early days of America? First of all, who was the workforce that built all these asylums when you really think about it, when your population is even that big and you're a brand new state and nation? But then it's kind of like, why do you have such an insane problem? Why are there so many lunatics everywhere? Or who are these people who have just completely lost their minds so completely that they need to be removed from society exactly? And why do you have so many asylums when you're a new
Hmm.
nation with a relatively low population, right? It makes no sense. Who's filling these buildings? Well, it's likely these were people who lived during the millennial reign and remembered and refused to capitulate to the new order.
Hmm.
So I don't think they were easy to kill. I think they had extended life. I think they were hardy people who had lived for a long time, and I think they were relatively invincible compared to us today. They had lived during a time where there was cymatic helium frequencies everywhere and living waters running through everything. And I think they were a
Hmm.
super hardy people, impossible to kill. And lobotomies were one way of trying to subdue these people, but I just don't think it was easy to do anything to them. You know what I mean? And I think, well, we'll just lock them up then and let them live out the
Yeah.
rest of their life until they've expired in these asylums. It's the best we can do. And it's funny because we found a newspaper clipping from these time periods. Vitali from Alpha Talks did, and I've got images somewhere. Maybe I'll send them to you when I get a chance. But within this newspaper is it was written explaining this thing about the insane and what do we do with them. And it specifically says these are people who talk of a golden age where everything was perfect and this type of thing. And it's kind of literally discussing exactly what I just said to you there. You know what I mean? These people believe in a golden age that once was, but never truly was, gaslighting them to say, nah, it never existed. And it's kind of, I think their children were taken from them and re educated by these secret societies to believe the new narrative and to not know the history of where they come from or who their parents, what their parents lived through necessarily, because they were completely separated from their parents, had their names changed, and then were scattered all over America to repopulate the place. But while also being used as slave labor by the fat cats in top hats who didn't want to lift a finger to build their new empires, and dig out all the crap buildings which were buried and reestablish themselves as the kings of the new age. So that makes sense of the orphan trains quite well. And somebody keeps saying to me, well, they're all white. Why are all the orphans white? We're all the black children and the native children. And I think a lot of these children were shipped over from Europe, where we seem to have
Yeah.
a main hub of these grand Gothic architectural cities. And I think Europe seems to have been a major hub of the millennial kingdom for whatever
I
reason.
really,
I'm not going to get
I
into
really,
why, but that seems to be the case.
I bet you the main hub was what we now call Germany, or what was the Prussian Empire.
Something like
Like when
that.
you
Yeah.
when you look at like the communist movement and like the overall amount of, let's just say, communist fascist ideals that have been like foisted upon the peoples of Prussia and Russia, like to me that it's very obvious. And you guys are bringing up how decimated Siberia was.
Oh yeah.
Like somebody went through Siberia and like really did some damage like that. So that
Serious,
was out.
serious damage. Yeah. I don't know when. I don't know when that happened exactly. It could have been from tribulation. It could have been
Right.
stones coming down from Earth, just annihilating that. It looks like it's been peppered by shotgun shells the size of
Mhm.
mountains. You know what I mean? It's just been blasted and blasted. Nothing but craters for like 2,000 miles straight along the northern coast of Russia and Siberia, all the way
Mhm.
from one tip to another. And it's just uninhabitable wasteland. It's a tundra of waste. But then when you look at the old maps of what we call Grand Tartaria, which basically means unknown land, that's what they call Tartaria. Just more land is what Tartaria basically means. Unexplored land, shall we say. You find there's actually all these maps that show that there was civilization living in these regions, buildings, castles, regions with names, cities. You have these Orthodox style onion domed cities painted in these regions. You know what I mean? All scattered all the way throughout that whole northern Siberia hemisphere part, either side of the Ural Mountains. You know what I mean? You see civilization is there, and it's all in the traditional Tartarian Orthodox onion dome architectural 5D church style. But there's nothing there today. But these maps is fully inhabited. It's fully inhabited by city after city after city after city, all next to each other, not that far away from each other. It's a fully livable place with a plethora of beauty and architecture available to us. But today, there's nothing there. It's a complete tundra, empty. Just tiny little nomadic tribes worshipping odd gods and sacrificing and shamans, you know what I mean? Scattered in yurts and huts here and there, but nothing cohesive, no cities, you know. What the hell
So,
happened? What happened?
so th-
When?
this this brings me to probably the biggest point that makes the most sense that you've brought up time and time again, but it's worth repeating. Is that what has been the major entertainment slash entrainment conditioning, social engineering around the mothership? This whole thing with the mothership. The
Yeah,
mothership is coming.
yeah.
And
Biblically speaking, New Jerusalem is described as descending from heaven. That's kind of how it all kicks off, the new heaven and earth. New Jerusalem descends from heaven and establishes an eternal kingdom on earth in a new heaven and earth at the end of time. It seems like something like that may have happened after tribulation during the millennial reign, where it says he rules from the beloved city, which is Mount Zion, where people have to make pilgrimage to during his millennial reign period, where Satan's locked up for 1,000 years. So there is a physical beloved city aspect. There's something, I don't know if it's New Jerusalem, but there's certainly this place which people had to go to where Christ was. I think there was a physical manifestation of the heavenly kingdom. It seems like the heavenly kingdom descends down to match up with the physical realm or something. Like something happens at the end, which is just fantastical. And it's hard to describe or know the unknowable until it's happening in front of your very eyes. But it's described as being like 1,500 stadia by 1,500 stadia, which in like kilometers is like 1,650 kilometers wide. It's stupidly large. It's like the size of continents, this thing. And when it descends from heaven, there's not one single human being on the earth who will not see it. It will be unprecedented. Like it'll be everyone just suddenly looks north and there's this thing in the sky. And biblically, yeah, that's New Jerusalem descending from heaven. That's what it will look like. That it'll be, and every knee will bow. It'll be undeniable what's going on by this point. You know what I mean? Like, who can deny such a thing? But in the modern age, nobody's programmed to understand or interpret such an event from a biblical standpoint. No one's going to see it that way because we have had the last 100 years of indoctrination to see anything of the sorts as an alien invading us from space with a mothership. And that's basically what the media has been bombarding us with since Orson Welles made his radio broadcast like 100 years ago, not telling anybody it was a radio fiction that aliens are attacking. The tripods have come, they burst out of the ground. And the tangible results of that broadcast were people were going out shooting their own grain towers at night, thinking it was a tripod alien invading them. It's kind of But since that day, it's been nothing but propaganda after propaganda after propaganda, prepping people for an alien invasion of some sorts. They came from out of space in the 50s, with these, and it's kind of like Mars attack and this type of stuff, and then Independence Day, and it's been just a one ramping up idea that vast infinite universes in space, aliens will turn up eventually, evolution theory, we are all just mold on a rock and insignificant. Why wouldn't aliens turn up? And if they do, we're in trouble, because it's all about evolution. It's survival of the fittest, baby, and if you haven't advanced enough, you're gonna die. So it's kind of, you've got to fight back against, you want to fight back against aliens, you need to advance yourself, you need to become superhuman, like superheroes or something. You need to become something else. And I imagine when New Jerusalem rocks up, people will only interpret it as an alien invasion. They can't see it any other way because they haven't learned any other way. They've been indoctrinated to interpret it one specific way. Predictive programming is just that. It's to program you to react a specific way when an event happens. That's what predictive programming is for. So when New Jerusalem rocks up, you have been predictively programmed to interpret it as mothership from space. And then they'll probably
Yes.
unleash the Nephilim horde. They'll unleash their own UFOs they've built in these underground military bunkers your master makes, with his Roman concrete. They'll release all the things we've been building for, the alien grades, which we produced in labs somewhere as host bodies for the demons, the Nephilim spirits. They'll unleash it all, and they'll attack everything with these man-made monsters and machines. But we will interpret it as the mothership has just released its army on us, and we'll think we're under attack by aliens. So it is a false alien invasion, but it's a double blind, because it's, biblically speaking, that is new heaven, that is New Jerusalem descending from heaven. But you will not know that, and that will never get told to you in the new narrative. You'll be told it's aliens and it's mankind's last stand. It's likely good aliens will turn up from the Galactic Federation of Peace or something, I don't know, and they'll push back the first wave. And then they'll say to humanity, you need to advance like we are to the next stage of evolution, or if you want to survive this. This is a scourge of the galaxy that's been going around destroying planets, and we've come to save you, or something like that, which is Lucifer posing as an angel of light, come to save humanity by offering advancements, change your image of God to something else, be more like our image, something like that. And people in that state, after just being decimated by monsters and flying saucers, will be terrified and will take anything. And they'll be like, yes, please save us from the evil invading aliens, and we'll do anything you want. And then maybe there's a time of peace or something, and then suddenly it's time to go attack the mothership. Let's take the fight. Let's take the fight to them, before they send the second wave. And humanity, with their new advancements, their new weaponry, their new body modifications, and all this type of thing, gifted to them by the angels or aliens, will say, "Let's go and get them. Let's get them, boys." And then the whole Earth has been turned into one conglomerate once again. It's a new world order with no boundaries, no borders. Everyone's on the same page. No more wars, no more petty struggles. Why are we fighting each other when humanity's under extinction threat from an outside alien threat? Everyone comes together as one army. Let's all march north and surround the mothership, which is precisely what it says happens in Revelation 20. Satan will be released from his prison for a short season to gather an army whose number is of the sands of the sea, Gog and Magog, to make war with the camp of saints, that beloved city. And they will march up the breadth of the earth, surround the camp of saints, and then sudden destruction and fire from heaven will rain down and put an end to them. And then final great white throne judgment at the end of time before the throne of God. If you're covered by the blood of the Lamb, you're saved. You'll have your own judgment based on your works, but you'll be covered. You'll be saved anyway. You get access to the new heaven and earth. I guess Christ is just judging what will your station be in the new heaven and earth. But if you're not covered by the blood of the Lamb, you have to only get judged solely by your works, and you're not covered. And you will fail because your works will not save you. You have to have accepted the free gift of salvation from Christ, So there's two judgment seats. There's the judgment seat of God, and then there's the judgment seat of his Son. You want to be with the Son. You want to be on his side, okay, by that point. But then, only then, after that's been sifted and the wheat from the tares has been separated and the good and the evil has been sorted, and the devil and the false prophets in the lake of fire has been destroyed forever, a new heaven and earth is established. So earth is renewed. All the Nephilim parasitical demons are purged from it. There's no longer this negative force in the spirit realm messing with you anymore, and the devil and his legions are gone. And now humanity in this new heaven and earth can establish the eternal kingdom, which was always eternal from the millennial reign, but now it's final. It's done now. The Satan's had his last stand and it's over. But no one's going to see it that way. No one knows that that's what happens at the end of the Bible. No one's read that far. Everyone's still stuck in Christ is still supposed to come back. We're still waiting for tribulation. They are way behind where we are in time, if that's the case. So a lot of Christians won't have an understanding of what's happening to them when New Jerusalem turns up. Even Christians who haven't thought this far ahead will see it and think aliens are attacking us. So
let's put this in context when it comes to military budgets. Mm-hmm. So it's now being released all throughout the CIA's involvement with the entertainment industry in the U.S. Okay, I forget what the numbers are, but we're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars of money being funneled through essentially the entrainment of Hollywood, of the sorcerer's wand. I mean, Hollywood is the sorcerer's wand. Mm-hmm. And this, they don't spend that money just for shits and giggles. They don't just do that just so that they could say, oh, well, we just wanted to see whether or not the people would react this way or that way. That's especially right. Over 80, 90 years of them doing it. Like, let's be real. This has been a very, very long campaign. It's very obvious to me that the Nazi propaganda machine of the Third Reich was brought over in Project Paperclip. Whoever's running the money exchanges in the United States was like, oh God, those Nazis, they figured out how to brainwash people really well. They buddy up to the iconic, children's cartoonist Walt Disney, start feeding the propaganda to the kids because they're always in theta state. They're just taking this in. There's a new medium called TV. There's all these things where there's a flashing picture box at a certain rate, and all this information now floods into essentially the boomer generation, during their formative years, which is the most important time. And now we're living the result of that. Like divorce, immorality, all these things are just like sky high. I look at people's motivation and wanting to do the type of work that I do, and what I build is simple, but it's not easy. Like domes, they're simple once you understand the geometry of it and how to do it, but they're not easy because it's so out of the ordinary. Everybody lives in a cube. I love that reference that you brought up to the Borg.
Yeah,
because it's so Saturnian, it's apropos for the time that we're in. But you have this Borg like consciousness where resistance is futile. Everybody's in a box. Everybody's looking at a box. And when I say everybody, I'm just saying that for dramatic effect. Obviously, there's people that are free of these things. It's just all too perfect, Paul. Like, this is the master conspiracy, as you said. It literally ties. I don't see any fault in it. Like, I'm trying to poke holes in it because I have Masons in my life that are defending the historical narrative, and they're trying to tell me things from an alchemical perspective in their lore, and I know more alchemy than they do, and I'm just like, I'm not buying it. Like, I get this sense of like there's something, there's the heart is missing. That like the heart of Christ is missing. This over concentration of gnosis isn't where it's at. That isn't the light bearer. That isn't the real truth.
Well, there's always been a Gnostic parasitical infection when it comes to Christ. That's always been kind of trying to mythologize or make him an analogy for something, or in some way say he's just a state of mind. He's not actually real. Always he's an astronomical figure, and he's not actually a real tangible person who walked on the earth who had a kingdom and this type of stuff. It was just a way we described alchemical principles and astronomical principles. And I've heard it all before, but this theory really makes it black and white, solid. No, he was a real man who walked the earth, performed miracles, died and rose from the dead, claimed to be the son of God, and then established a real tangible kingdom on earth for 1,000 years with his resurrected saints as his kings and rulers over humanity. And we are living squatting in the ruined remnants of that 1,000 years for a short period where the devil's in control. These are real people, real entities that have a tangible, real agendas. And you have to, which kingdom do you want to be a part of? Is really the question that we're asking here. Democracy is not going to save you. This is a kingdom. We're talking about kingdoms here. There's one ruler.
Right.
And who better to rule humanity than the Son of God? Like when you really think about it, that's the way I see it. And I'm not looking to mythologize our king. That's the way I see it.
Hallelujah. Awesome.
Go.
Awesome. I know I had you up for an hour and a half. I could talk to you forever. I have to tell you, I'm very impressed with how succinct and how eloquent you're delivering this message. It just keeps getting better, and I really send all the blessings that I can in
Thank
your
you.
direction and all the prayers, because like it's such you're just doing God's work, and I really appreciate
I'm
that.
trying my best. When you talk for as long as I do, you can't help but get a little bit more refined as time goes on. But I am just the guy who talks too much, and I'm along for I'm along for the ride, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. We're just looking for the truth, and we're working together. I don't know everything, but people like yourself, like I said, you bring your own piece of the puzzle with your knowledge on Roman concrete and on architectural structures and designs, and that's what we need. We need to work together on this, and together we can holistically piece together the image. And like I said, this is the grand unifying glue to bring all the pieces together, shall we say? And
Yes.
it's all finally making sense. We haven't made sense of everything. There's a lot of stuff we do have to reinterpret. We may have to let go of some things like documented history. Some of it may be
Mm.
made up and lies. We're trying our best to figure out what is and isn't the lie. We're not just throwing it all out. A lot of it comes down to it's true. It's just been dated to the wrong time. So there's that as well,
Mhm.
So like I said, I'm not looking to just throw everything out.
Right.
I'm not trying to be so open-minded my brain falls out. I'm trying to keep this grounded,
Right.
and more things just keep coming to light on a daily basis, which can help us achieve that. And I think this has brought more people to Christ than pushed them away.
I
Sadly,
I
it's established Christians who dislike this theory more than non-believers. Sadly,
I have to tell you, there's a ton of more resistance amongst my Christian friends with this than anything. There's a couple
yeah,
open-minded just because they know how earnest I am. Like, I've gotten in trouble in their eyes in the past with exploring these sort of taboo Christian concepts. Like one, by the way, that could link all this together is the law. It is a question of jurisdiction. Well, jurisdiction means kingdom. So literally I think one of the biggest tells of any like truther movie ever was in The Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino. And that movie, for those of you that haven't seen it, it's essentially Satan spawns a bunch of children and this story follows one of these children making his way back to his father to give birth or to inseminate his sister to create the Antichrist. And so the penultimate point of the movie was that Satan, uh, the way he gets into everything is through the law, through jurisdiction.
mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh man, it's so brilliant because Keanu Reeves plays his son and he's all pissed off and he's like, why the law? And he's like, because it's in everything, son. Like we're in everything. And of course, people have their opinions of lawyers and things like that. But looking at it from a more obtuse angle, like looking at it from a higher perspective, is that in law, you establish when you establish your jurisdiction, like you brought up monasteries. When I lived in Europe, that was the only way you could own land, like really own land. Like I was looking at this in Portugal and Spain. For you to own land, for you to have the land, not just the title, but actually have the rights to your land, you had to put a monastery on it.
Interesting.
So to have direct jurisdiction of your land, you had to put a monastery on it. There's
Mm-hmm.
a monastery. Because I was being shown all throughout Scotland when I was going to all these manors. The creditor that I was with, he was like, "What do you see at all these manors that we're going by?" And I'm like, "They all have a monastery." And he goes, "Well, what does that mean to you?" And I was like, "What, were these very religious people?" And he smiled at me with a smirk and he goes, "They're not religious people." And I was like, "Why would you have a monastery?" And so I looked it up.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, because monasteries give you the property rights. And I was like, why would a monastery? And then I learned what the word jurisdiction actually meant. And jurisdiction meant king, like your kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
This is now your kingdom. But it had to be where you only answered to the kingdom.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
this all fits.
Mm-hmm.
Like this whole thing fits. It's still, whether the rich people want to tell you or not, this still fits. Common, like what, like it's embedded into all property rights around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Well,
that's amazing.
Christ never stopped being the king of this world and the ruler of this world. His kingdom is eternal, and Satan is on a leash at the end of the day, a very short one. He hasn't got long,
Mhm.
and yeah, there's many reasons why he's here. There's many people arguing what the purpose of the short season was. We alluded there earlier that we could be the rest of the dead who live not again till the
Yeah.
1,000 years had ended. Now, but a lot of people say, no, that's just resurrected for judgment at the end of time only. But it doesn't say that. It says when the 1,000 years has ended, the rest of the dead are resurrected, basically. So 1,000 years has ended. So let's assume the rest of the dead may have resurrected. It's possible. And we could be some of those people living among those who are the descendants of the survivors of the millennial reign as well. And that would make sense of giving those who lived before Christ a chance at salvation, a chance to choose the devil or Jesus, a chance to know Jesus, which we can in this
Mhm.
day and age. You can live your entire life and you will hear of Jesus Christ in that lifetime. It's very rare that you wouldn't, in this day and age. And I think that's maybe another point to the little season to give a chance to those who didn't get a chance to choose, who lived during a time where it was nothing but the law and failed. So where's their chance of eternal salvation? It's giving them a fair shake, as I've heard it described. Again, that's what the little season is technically for, to empty out Sheol of the rest of the dead, so they can choose a side, and then judgment at the end. Maybe
Mhm.
that's one theory, one idea. That was my working theory and idea at the start of all this, as I kind of said an hour ago. But I don't know. I don't know that for certain, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
speculation with this. Who truly knows? But maybe we should leave that there for another time because I do have to get
Yes.
going.
Paul, thank you again. Where can people find your work? Tell them about your book, and I'll let you go.
Sure. So, Understanding Conspiracy on YouTube is where you'll find me. I am on Rumble as well, but I don't really upload on there. But maybe go there anyway, just as a backup, just in case anything goes horribly wrong in the future and I need another place to go. You can find me on Instagram as well if you want. I get tagged in a lot of things on there. It's a good way to communicate with me as well if you want to send me a message. And I also have a Telegram group called Understanding Conspiracy with 1,800 members. It's a great community, lots of subtopics on there, a lot of sharing of ideas if you want to come and join in. I have published a book called The Nephilim Look Like Clowns. You can see the poster right here behind me. You can find that on Amazon. That's just type in The Nephilim Look Like Clowns. You can't miss it. It's doing really well. It's got a 4.7-star rating. It's got 107 reviews. I've sold 3,000 copies since July.
Beautiful.
It's what I'm predominantly known for before this discussion today. It's what we've
Yes.
discussed in the past. I'm writing the second volume to finish off the work. All the videos on my channel are in a playlist for the Nephilim Look Like Clowns. So all the information can be get for free on my channel if you're more of a visual learner But I am compiling all that information, that body of work I created into book format. So that should be finished by the end of the year, hopefully. And then I can move on to maybe writing a book about this topic instead. But yeah,
Perfect.
that's all my stuff. There it is.
Perfect. If you ever need any contributions with domes, Gothic architecture, any of that, any binders, any ancient Roman binders, I'm your man. I'm here for you.
Fantastic. I'll take you up on that, Chris. No problem.
Awesome. Well, you have a good one. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless.
Are you tired of the same old conversations? Do you often find yourself struggling to know what to say? Are you over discussing the news, sports ball, or the weather? It's time to put boring discussions behind you by leaving a copy of The Nephilim Look Like Clowns on your coffee table, your toilet, your local library, mother's car, boss's office desk, or that person you really like's bed instead.
What the hell is this?
Oh, that? Why, it's just a book about how the modern costume of a clown is a caricature of ancient giants and modern demons.
Stay away from my children.
This is a conversation you can't wait to have. My family used to think I was crazy, but thanks to The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, they know I'm crazy. The Nephilim Looks Like Clowns. It's no laughing matter.